Hi class. Today we start our first lesson of unit number 3, Business Organization and Finance. Today's learning goals are knowing how to distinguish between types of firms and industrial activity, be able to connect industry growth with firm structure, and to understand why one would choose different structures of firms. Our success criteria will be kind of team teaching as you work through some Google documents, and then completion and review of homework, of course. And so to start today's lesson, we want to look at what is industrial activity. And so I believe some of you may have encountered these terms before, but we just want to review them to have a kind of framework for this unit. This lesson is actually going to be very short, as I'm going to have you doing some of your own independent study on some topics. But let's just get down to what we're talking about right now: the typical economic development of nations. And so every nation is going to go through a bunch of steps or has different portions of economic development. And so, firstly, we want to look at the original thing that most nations go through is going to have lots of goods producing economy. And so, when we mean by goods producing, we're talking about primary resources, natural resources, farming, fishing, mining, anything that you basically get from the land or from the earth or from your natural habitat. We are going to extract from the world, and this is a primary version of goods producing economy. And so the second part is that secondary goods producing economy, which is a manufacturing. And so when you think about economies, you could have nations or economies that are very, very farming rich or very fishing or mining, and those economies will typically grow faster as you start to learn how to do secondary industries, right? So if you have a logging company, you chopping down trees, that's going to get you a certain amount of wealth or a certain amount of trade potential, a certain amount of economic activity. But once you start being able to process that kind of stuff or manufacture that stuff into different things, we get paper mills for our lumberyard, we get steel mills for our mining, and factories for making and building certain types of things. And so once you enter that secondary marketplace, your economy is going to start to grow much more rapidly. And so you're going to see many less developed nations having lots of primary, and as they start to get more secondary or more manufacturing, their nations will start to grow. And then even beyond that, we're going to grow much more when we enter a service sector of an economy. So the service sector of the economy talks about the tertiary. Okay, so when we talk about tertiary, we talk about any wholesale, any retail, any medical, any services that your economy can perform for its people, right? So we're not talking about only selling goods. We're not talking about selling and creating and constructing or building these types of things. We're talking about the service industry, where we are going to give people accounting, law, medical, schooling, right? The facilitation of some of the secondary goods manufacturing is going to be through the retail sector, okay? And fourth is going to be quaternary or high tech, when we have nations that are highly developed, going into research and development, going to technology, nuclear energies. Those kinds of things are where economies will typically go. Primary industry to secondary to tertiary and to quaternary. And typically we'll separate them in two major categories, which is good producing, which is primary and secondary, where we make things, to service sector, where we facilitate things, pass along knowledge, as well as do research into more discovery. And so the thinking question here is to ask, where does Canada sit in this grouping of types of economic development, right? We can all say that we do have primary industry, we have lots of it. We do have secondary industry, we have lots of it. We do have tertiary industry, we have lots of it. Again, we have quaternary industry, we have lots of it, right? So Canada definitely has all of these, and so is a well-developed nation. But if I were to ask you the question of our economy or of our economic activity, what do we think we do most? Which of these four things, or which of this one versus two parts or types of activity does Canada use or do or have the most of? Okay, and so take a minute, think about that. Think about, are we more goods producing or are we more service sector? What's Canada known for? All those types of thoughts should hopefully come into your mind. So hopefully you've taken a minute to think about this quite a bit. And so lots of people are going to say, we're probably a lot more goods producing, right? What are we known for? We're known for our natural resources. We're known for our fresh water. We're known for our trees. We're known for, the Canadian Shield for our mining. So we're known for our oil, some of those kinds of things. So we're known for our fishing. So all those kinds of things is true. We are known for lots and lots of those types of things. But then I would ask a question, like if that's what you believe we do the most of, I'll ask, what do you do the most of? So if you think about yourselves and what you do on a daily basis, how many of you interact with primary industry? Maybe some. How many of you have been to a farm? Maybe some. How many of you interact with secondary industry? In a factory, steel mill? Maybe you have worked somewhere where you do processing of stuff, possibly. But then if I asked you how many of you worked in a tertiary industry or interact with the tertiary industry, every single one of you, right now you're sitting in tertiary industry in school, right? So everything you do is service sector for the most part, the majority of things you do. Every primary industry is going to go through secondary, and which is ultimately most of it goes through tertiary industry, right? So while we are known in Canada as a very, very high goods producing nation, high natural resource nation, we are still highly tertiary or service sector in terms of our economic output. So let's just take a look at how Canada has progressed over time in terms of what we produce and the industrial activity we produce. So we're going to look at primary industry, secondary industry, and services industry. Okay, we'll forget quaternary, but we'll look at these three. And so back in 1881, this is many, many years ago when Canada was just a very, very early nation, right? So back in the day, half of our economic activity, 51.3%, was a primary industry, which makes sense. We extract from the land. We don't want to do that much other stuff. We probably have some kind of logging industry to build stuff, right? And there's going to be some services, but the majority of our trade is primary industry based. And so if you look at this table, as we progress through the years, you're going to see primary industry is shrinking, and services industry is growing. Right, and secondary is stays relatively flat, and so my question here is, we went from 51.3% of primary industry, and in 1999, primary industry was only 4.7% of our economic activity, right? So what does that mean? Question one: does that mean that we do less primary industry than we did before? Think about that. Would that make sense? Does Canada do less primary industry now than we did in 1881? Okay, and so hopefully if you think about this, you'll realize that no, of course we don't. Our economic activity as a nation has grown enormously. Okay, now primary is only a smaller portion of that pie, yet this pie is significantly bigger. So let's just take a look at this. So some estimates from 1881 have our GDP, which is the measure of our economic activity in Canada, at 540 million or 541 million. Okay, and so of this economic activity, 541 million, it says that 51.3% of this activity here was primary industry. Okay, so that's 51%. So we're looking at half of that, half of 540 million. But if you look at gross domestic product in 1999, we're looking at 678 billion. Okay, so 51% of 540 million, while a big portion of that is actually significantly smaller than 4.7% of 678 billion. Okay, so we're talking about billions of dollars versus millions of dollars. And then if you look at it now, currently in 2019, Canada's GDP was 1.7 trillion, right? So our primary industry has grown, our secondary industry has grown, and our services industry has all grown. Okay, so the pie has gotten significantly bigger. And now primary industry is just a smaller piece of a much larger pie. And so if you look at our numbers for 1999, and you look at how much primary industry was in 1999 of that $678 billion, you're going to find out that 4.7% of 678 billion is actually 32 billion, right? The primary industry in 1999 was way, 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 way bigger than our entire economy in 1881. So again, the small sliver of a pie of 4.7% is bigger than the actual entire pie in 1881. So I just want to be very clear with how our economic activity has grown so much in Canada in that short amount of time. Even in this past 20 years, we're talking about almost tripling of amount of economic activity. Okay? And so now we're going to shift gears a little bit. And so we talked about how primary industry, secondary industry, and services, or tertiary, quaternary industry happen. All economies that grow as nations economically and develop are going to go through this progress where primary starts to shrink as a percentage of pie, and services will grow as a percentage of pie. Okay, and so we want to look at as economies grow and develop, what kind of businesses are going to emerge from these economies. And so that's where we're going to take it now. Forms of business organization. And so this is actually in your text in page 123 it starts, but you'll want to use your textbook as well as other sources on the internet to find out about these types of business organizations. So what do we want to discover? We want to discover what they are, how they work, the advantages and disadvantages of said type of organization, and other details that might be pertinent for this type of business organization. So there are going to be 6 different types: sole proprietorship, partnership, corporation, cooperative enterprise, and government enterprise, and nonprofit and charitable organizations. So your task is to do some research on these 6 different types of business organization. And so similar to the beginning of previous lessons, I'll post a Google Doc that you can fill in, and so your job will be to fill in your portion, and I'll post the who's doing which portion, and from that everyone can access it and everyone can fill out their notes to complete forms of business organization. All right, that's the lesson for today. Thank you.